we all treasure oral history, don't we? I was living in the States and my grandfather sent me a cassette of his memories growing up in Prospect. And you know where St. Helens Park is? Well, that was St. Helens, and he was friends with the family. And they had a crippled son who got around in a wheelchair. And his dad used to put on these military shows and they'd dress up in uniforms and march around and let off crackers. My grandfather described all that. It was just wonderful. I can't find the tape. Anyway, so SANFL initiative. Many of you will know about the SANFL History Centre, but I'll just recap. Established in 2014, currently at Bodum, and here's some breaking news. In the next couple of weeks, it's going to move upstairs here. We'd rather give West Adelaide the rent than the Lutherans. And so that's all being remodelled a bit to fit in with us, which is great. And you'll know Christine is the mentor, boss, duck, or she'll see you and give you a job. But it is supported by a terrific group of volunteers with the overlook of the SANFL History Committee. So it is about preserving the history of South Australian football. So that involves the three phases: collecting, preserving, and then organising. And the organising's done through the bit of software called Lucidia, database software shared around the AFL universe, paid for by the AFL. So it enables us to keep very accurate records of where something came from, where it's stored, what sort of condition it's in. It's very important to us. And so, not surprisingly, that's the breadth of what's in the collection. Just as an interest, I added papers at the end. There's an awful lot of league papers, minutes, and including the proceedings of the West Lakes lighting saga, the Royal Commission. There are 16 volumes of proceedings on the West Lakes Lighting Royal Commission. I'm going to unearth them one day. My particular interest, having come from a television environment, was in the video collection. And this is really a remarkable achievement because not only did the group manage to collect up all the broadcast tapes from ABC 7, 9 and 10, which in itself was an extraordinary trove of material. But we had the extraordinary fortune to have George Usher helping us. George used to own a business in Kent Town called Utel, and he was always a boffin. And in his retirement, he set up a flat up on McGill Road with every bit of equipment you can imagine. And there were cables going between rooms. He had a telecine set up for 16mm film. But in particular, he had the ability to digitize those 1-inch broadcast tapes, of which there were hundreds. And it was in the days when the SANFL had a budget. I think it cost something like $100,000 to get to where we are now. Sadly, George died last year, but his job was done. Peter Roberts at the History Centre spends a lot of time and energy trying to unravel what's on those files, previews them, copies some off. We reckon there's about 4,000 video files. And on those files are what you would expect: many minor round games, lots of finals, some really good interstate games, pre-season games. Magarey Medal telecasts are gold because there are people at those events that are long gone that are often featured or shown. I spent a lot of time for our last exhibition going through all the Magarey Medal videos to put together a sort of an edited piece. And they're just fantastic. And in amongst them are these interviews. Now, the interviews are a challenge because at the moment, what's in our collection is buried, half-time in a game or after a Hall of Fame or whatever. So we've never been able to sort of structure an approach to the interviews, but we are trying to get a better handle on where some of these interviews are. Amongst the broadcast tapes that we still haven't digitised, we got a lot of tapes from the ABC, and they used to have a weekly football show when they took over in '92. And we've got all of their working tapes from what they did during the week to go and record interviews, prepare stuff. And so one of our jobs in the future years is to preview all of these Betacam tapes and unravel some of the interviews and stories that are buried in them. That's going to be a big job. So this opportunity to start some interviews in a more structured basis really started when Chris Halbert had been talking to Wally, and there was an opportunity to interview Wally. So we went to his house. All of this work has been done with professional camera person, Lyndall, former colleague of mine from Channel 9, good operator, good equipment. And so once we'd talked to Wally, soon after that, by coincidence, Barmy was in town for a talk at the Eagles function. We grabbed him, and we really saw that, this is an opportunity we shouldn't miss, particularly brought home to us when Wally died not that long afterwards. Wally is, of course, a legend at Nord, but a ripping bloke if you'd ever dealt with him. Many years ago, one of the tawdry jobs I used to do at Channel 9 was do the ring around on Friday for KG's footy show. I'd ring Nord Footy Club, and Wally was always, yeah, that'll be right. Who do you need? What time? Then I'd ring West Adelaide. So there's a little excerpt from my interview with Wally.
One of our phys ed guys, Grant Pavey by name, went to an allied health conference in Melbourne, and he met up with Barry Richardson, who was a Richmond fullback, premiership player, and his mate of Barnes. So they were talking about Nord's impasse in coaching, or coaching position. And he said, well, try this guy. Have a look at him. Anyway, Grant came back and gave me that news, and I rang Tom Havey. And in essence, Tom said, well, you'd be a fool not to try. And we know Barb is a Victorian thug. Awful reputation. And well, I sort of trust Havey on a character issue anyway. And eventually we got to Barby. At the time he had a glandular fever or a hepatitis strain. He was in Fairfield Hospital. So it took a while to get, for him to get over and sort that out. And first impressions, he came out of hospital and he was still half cruel. But he had long hair and cowboy boots on, and he really came over to see Neil Roberts, his mate. I spoke to this guy who's imposingly a big man, but he's bloody intelligent, he's polite, he's thoughtful, and he's decent sort of a guy. So there was enough interest in him to come back again for another talk, and then he started to watch videos and whatever. He never coached, never thought about it. We'd previously gone for Sheedy, and he knocked us back at the end. So we put it to the committee that was Bob Farnham, put it to the committee that we should have a serious look at this bloke. And then they say everything hit the fan because the supporters rejected it. The players were most unhappy about the appointment. And we've got the image of this Victorian thug, aged 27, coming to coach. And Mickey Noonan wanted the job, and it was a bit of a mess, really. And there was all sorts of walkouts forecast, and whatever. And I remember saying, after being battered with all this, there'll be 20 blokes run down the race on the first game, and they'll be wearing red and blue, and they'll be trying, and they'll be Norwood. Anyway, it did settle down after a while. Mainly through the senior guys who had great influence at Norwood always. Gallagher, Wynne, Rosser, Stasnowski. Had a bit of a conversation one day, and they said, we reckon this bloke's all right. You know, he's our age, he's a good bloke, good bloke socially, whatever. He said, you know, it's jack shit about football, but I reckon we'll give it a go. And from that moment onwards, away we went. And he developed a very fine team. He was the decent guy that I've ever encountered. In fact, the 11 years that Neil was there, there was 2 premierships. We were runner-up against Port in 80. We made the 3rd 3 times, 4th once, and at 5th twice.
Yeah, he's a terrific bloke, Wally. I counted a sincere pleasure to have had the hour or so with him talking through the footy things. Barmy. So what I didn't include, there's a clip in there that Wally said that the 11 years that he worked with Barm were his happiest years at Norwood, which is a pretty good tribute. So Barmy was in town, as I say, to talk to the old Eagles mob. So we set up at the Woodville Club Rooms. I've picked out an excerpt about Neil talking about the '84 grand final. What's the feeling?
Yeah, I think we realised what we had to do, and every game was the last game you're going to play, and I think that helped our attitude in a bit, because even you watch footy nowadays, you watch, well, how the hell did that happen? And it happens because the players aren't quite switched on, and it's very hard to control that. Particularly in the old days, you got one coach, controlling the whole thing and trying to make sure, and then you have a meeting that lasts 35 minutes, and half of them are falling asleep, and you just got to make sure they understand what their role is and that they're really with you and that they're engaged and the bloke next to them's helping them and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's what we got in '84. We really were really proud of it, because I think we played Torrens in one of the last few games at Theberton, and if we didn't win, we're dead ducks. We're not going to be in the finals. But if we, and I think Torrens were up by 5 or 6 goals at 3/4 time or something. I can't remember all the details. And so we just said, right, boys, let's just play. And it's sometimes the best way to coach is say, let's just play. Like, we've trained all this. You know what to do. You know how to work together. You know how good you are. When the ball comes along, you know you can get it. You know you can kick it. Let's just do it. And I think, well, it's only for 30 minutes. Let's see how we go. And we were just wonderful, and finished up just getting up. And that really helped. If we didn't do that, we weren't going to make the finals. And I reckon that was something that we sort of thought later, well, we can do it. What about that quarter of footy? Let's just play that way. So it was a challenge to get through the finals. But in that, because I don't think we lost too many. I think, we did pretty well to come through, and we were still pretty strong. And I think by grand final time, we were just ready to play our absolute best as well, which sometimes doesn't happen. Sometimes it costs you a fair bit to get through finals. But that grand final day was one of the days of my life, I must admit. Because we're preparing to play Port, who've been the best side all year, and Port and Norwood, no matter what, is always a wonderful challenge, whether you're last or first. So we'd spent a lot of time, saying, okay, we just got to play a game, but they're going to do it. What are we going to do about it? And I remember thinking, well, we've got to kind of just take the initiative, unsettle them a little bit if we can. Not unsettle them, but just make them think, oh, God, what's going on, sort of thing. Because if you do that, you all of a sudden you're slightly on the back foot. It only has to last for a while, because that their coaches will straighten them up. And Ian Stasnowski was our, one of the chairman of selectors or whatever. And Stas is he was always mad, wonderful footy mad, always, you know, like a good fun view of the game, and had played for years on Tim Evans and always done a pretty reasonable job. Man, Tim, beautiful player, as you know. So he's sitting there and he's speaking to my brother Craig all week about what we're going to do with Tim, because he's playing on him. And I think he must have told him that, you know, just try and unsettle him. I don't even know what he said to him, but it would have been, I don't know, I wouldn't even say. And it was that, just words, doesn't matter, just you probably get 10 weeks for saying it now, whatever it is, but you're not allowed to say anything. But so we're all out there.
Please stand and join with Kim Durant in singing the national anthem of Australia.
The poor girls trying to sing Advance Australia Fair, and all the players are in the. It was a beautiful thing to look at. But then all of a sudden, I think Craig must have said what he needed to say, and Tim was a bit upset by it. He turned around and tried to whack him. Fighting in the goal square, poor old Umscott up. They've raced down to try. People that come from the poor girls singing Advance Australia Fair, and then sadly the camera comes on to me and I'm smirking, so they think I've made it all happen, which is not quite true. But when I look at it now, I'd like to take responsibility for it, because they had a bit to do with us winning the game. But because when you watch that first quarter, then they were trying to get back at us. They were dirty on us in a sense. And I remember, Dwayne Russell, Tim had got a free kick in the goal square, and Dwayne Russell comes from centre half forward and knocks Lester Ross into the crowd for some reason. And all of a sudden the umpire blows the whistle, turns the free kick around, and we get the kick. Instead of them kicking the first goal, we're kicking the. And then there was a few other little things happen where you could see that they were really, energised to, take control of the game in a sense, I suppose, physically. And that allowed us to do, we just played, don't we? We just played. And
His hands full, players running from everywhere, it's on! It's a stout! What an unbelievable start! Barham and Evans had to be separated by an umpire while the Australian anthem was being played. And now within the first 37 seconds of the game, there's a pile-up of about 25 to 30 players, and they still want a box on.
Instead of them taking over, which they could easily have done because they were generally the best side, had been the best side in the comp, we're sort of right in the game. So, and then that was made it a wonderful game for us. And then, I'll never forget Keith Thomas's running back the wrong way. Could have been killed, takes the mark, kicks the ball, or even kicked the game. And Ashes, he didn't do all that much that day, but that run down the line, and it's not fair to take those individual things out of it, but it was a fantastic game, particularly for us. And Port were terrific, but someone's got to win. Unfortunately, it was us, which is a wonderful historical thing.
Peter, that's what Norwood wanted. Keep the ball in their area.
Raw Neil Barham. Heading it's all over. The Redlegs have created history. They've won it from fifth spot. The 1984 grand final. 15-10 to 13-13. Victory by 9 points.
That was especially for Winton Heading. Good to hear Daisy as well in the commentary. What a legend. So then it made sense to get John, because I just had to ask Chris to get him available. I think the thing about talking to John anytime, his recollection of his early years in football is quite astounding. First year, 1955, he gets selected in the state team as a 17-year-old, goes to Perth. But he can talk with great knowledge of his early playing colleagues. So anyway, here's a John Howard story.
I decided I'd take a young woman out to the pictures, and I lived at Edwardstown, so I had to ride my bike from Edwardstown to Prospect, where she lived, and we went off to the pictures that night. And I came home after the pictures, and I was standing in the driveway of her house virtually saying goodnight to her, and her father walked past us, and he had been to the Grand Druid's lodge, obviously. He was all dressed up in his regalia. And as he went past me, he said, "Oh, congratulations, John." I just thought he was saying, you know, congratulations on a reasonably good year. So I said, oh, thanks very much. Got on my bike, rode home. Mum was still up waiting for me. And I thought, oh, I'm a bit late getting home. It was probably around midnight or a bit later, I can't remember. And I was a bit surprised when she was still up, and she said, oh, have you heard the news? And I said, what do you mean the news? She said, you've come runner-up in the McGarry Medal to Lindsay Head, beaten by one vote. But it was a rocket for me. I never expected to be anywhere near that. Well, it was good. I mean, it was lovely for me for a culmination of achieving something that would have been nice and looked as if it had avoided me on three occasions. Headsy beat me by just one vote. Then I got beaten by Headsy again 2 years later in 1958, and he beat me by a reasonable margin then. And then Barry Barbary topped me in 1960 by a few votes. And I thought, well, you know, that's the end of that. It's been a nice run to come runner-up 3 times, but it'll never happen. But it did happen the next year in 1961. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's nice that at the end of the season you recognise a player who has had an outstanding year and has been a great asset to the game. And it's, as a result of that, it's had that wonderful tradition going right back to 1898 when Albie Green won the first one. And everyone has regarded that as this is the highlight, the end of a wonderful football season for the players and for someone who's had a wonderful year.
I don't know how many of you have been into the chairman's room, SANFL chairman's room on level 3 at Adelaide Oval, but the History Centre has actually accumulated a display there of McGarry medals, either originals or replicas, and there's only about half a dozen that aren't there, including the 2 that weren't awarded in 1900 and 1904. 1900 because McGarry was in England and apparently didn't leave the money. 1904 because a Norwood player was going to win it and they were at war with the SANFL. Gee, that's unusual. So it's, yeah, we should find a way, Bernard, to have a meeting in there and have a gander at the medals. It's terrific to see. Okay, Johnny Platten. I've always been an admirer of Johnny. I actually made some commercials with him for his cousin's printing business, the Printing Hub. And he's always, you know, a knockabout bloke, really likeable. And his is a great story. I could find lots of bits that I think are highlights of what we talked about, but I've picked out that his story of being recruited.
I was fortunate enough at the end of 81, my first year. You know, I had people after me when I was in the Till Cup in 1980, and Hawthorn were the club which actually were after my services straight away, and they were good enough. I signed a contract at the end of 1981 to where I couldn't go to any other club for 3 years, and at that stage, and I was just turned 18. So I wanted to, as I said, wanted to play 100 games for Centrals. I wanted to play state football, and that opportunity came up as I grew up with Centrals, and then in 1984, Carlton found out that I was a Carlton supporter, which I was, big Carlton supporter, knowing that I signed with Hawthorn. 3 years later, that contract elapsed from Hawthorn, and then Carlton came over and they signed like Kernahan, Bradley and Motley, and also myself. And then, oh look, it was a good thing or bad thing. I played at Centrals for 1 more year, and then I had to make a decision to go to Hawthorn or Carlton at the end of 85. And look, you know, Carlton were a great side. I'm sure I would have done exactly the same that Carlton would have done at Hawthorn. But I suppose what tipped me over was the Hawthorn were a great family club. I come a big family of 9, and Hawthorn had a lot to do with me in that 5 years at Centrals and my family, and treated me really well. Alan Jeans was a great fella, and to get coached by Alan Jeans is something that, you know, a lot of blokes don't have the privilege to do. And and Lee Matthews was just retiring at the end of '85. Hawthorn had just played in the last 3 grand finals, won 83, lost 84 and lost 85. And there was a group of those guys, older fellas from Hawthorn, sort of ready to retire, which they did, and Lee Matthews was one. And I just thought that the opportunities at Hawthorn were probably more greater for a little bloke myself to play as a rover at Hawthorn at that stage was probably greater than going to Carlton as well. But Hawthorn was fantastic, you know, the great family club, and you know, the feedback I got from the players and that, it was great. It was fantastic.
Terry Moore, Central's ex, played in Melbourne for North Melbourne when Platts was trying to make up his mind about where to go. He said, well, if you go to Hawthorn, you won't have Lee Matthews running at you. Later on in the interview, he talks about a state game where he was playing against Matthews, and he said he thought that Matthews just stopped short of cleaning him up. I've always been a great fan of Mike Coward, mostly through his cricket writing. I worked with him quite a bit on the Saka Test match dinners, where we put videos together for those nights. And there was an opportunity to catch up with Mike when he was in town. Of course, a man of Norwood, so that was good for me. We had a terrific discussion. I mean, his recollection of the early years of the written press is fantastic. So I picked out this story.
Yeah, if you are a communicator in a communications industry, a lot of it comes down to personality and trust. The famous story of, just to illustrate that, I was sitting in the office one night, it would have been 1973. Phone rang, and it's, hello Mike, it's Wally Miller here. I've got one thing to say, and that's all. Robert Odie has finished as coach of Norwood. Bang. So it happened to be Pembroke's, what do you call them, speech night at the theatre on Kensington Road at Marriotteville, the Odeon, I think, or I can't remember, but near the Marriotteville, the turn off to Tasmore. And so here we were at 8 or 8:30 at night, and early, I mean, the deadlines weren't too bad in those days, probably 11 o'clock deadline, first edition. So I had this story. I did a holding piece saying that he was sacked, and that but I had to find Otie. So I got out to the theatre. You know, I found out where he would be at the speech night, and as I went down one aisle, he saw me coming and came out the other aisle, and so it was a bit of that, because Robert, I respected Robert, but he was difficult. He was a difficult individual, and but you know, his football knowledge was extraordinary, because mainly coming from Dad. But yeah, so then I got back, and the pure excitement then of being able to break that story. So you're out on the stone. These, of course, were the hot metal days. And that sort of terminology is unfamiliar to people today. And so you're out with the typesetters at 1 o'clock in the morning for the next edition, that's the big edition, at 1 or 1:30. And breaking the story like that. So that was Wally. He respected me and trusted me, and that was apart from the fact that he knew I was a Norwood man. Funniest one was that is I coached the under-15s at Pulteney Grammar School for 9 years, and that included the ASSH boys. And I must confess that at one stage I got wind of the fact of Michael training at West Torrens, or West Adelaide, or West Torrens, I think it was, funnily. And so I just had to mention that to Wally, just quietly in dispatches, and he moved on that pretty quickly, it must be said. Yeah, and what an extraordinary individual. I mean, I still remember him playing, and I still remember I always used to tease him about it, the shirt front of Brian Livesey. It was the biggest I've ever seen. And I've seen some biggies over the years, but his shirt front of Brian Livesey was extraordinary. So, and he would always sort of just, he would acknowledge it. He would acknowledge it. It was a big bump. He was a good player, really good player. I mean, the tragedy of that, to have played. I mean, there's so many wonderful Wally stories. I mean, even the fact that he played, his first game was 1958, I reckon, after the 57 grand final the next year. And he paid for his way into the ground because, you know, that's what you did. He hadn't been told any different. So he paid his whatever it was and got in and, you know, stripped and off he went. I mean, the simplicity and the honesty. And it's sad life. I mean, but did you ever hear him complain? Never. And he was just, I don't think I've known a more admired administrator in any sport.
Yeah, Mike covers a lot of interesting topics in the chat with him. We've been trying to get Peter for a while, and he was resisting. Just as a aside, amongst the collection at the History Centre are his scrapbooks, which his mother was compiling unbeknownst to him. So he didn't find out until his career finished that his mum had compiled these scrapbooks. So anyway, of course, he came to fame somewhat with his acceptance speech at the Hall of Fame in Melbourne, a really good yarn. So I think that got him thinking about perhaps he should go on the record. So we had a very interesting morning with Peter.
Well, he had the nucleus. He had the same team as 62, 63. 64, he brought in discipline. He brought in a training ethic, fitness. But he never lost that, took away from us that camaraderie that we shared for the last I shared for the last 1.5 years. So we were still able to have a drink. We used to go Friday nights to his pub. We'd have a drink, a meeting, a team meeting. He brought in disciplines in terms of training. He brought in physical trainers, a bloke called Joe Deemel and Keith Haston, Mark Haston's dad, amongst others. He brought in a training regime that just didn't involve doing laps around the oval, and he brought in skills coaches, so and fitness coaches, as I mentioned, and he had us running up, had a few of them running upstairs and skipping on the oval and running through sandhills and what have you. But you know, he was serious about it, and he made us perform. He had us running timed laps around the oval. I struggled to make the stopwatch used to run out when I started to run around the oval, but he didn't ask us to do anything that he couldn't do, and so we all respected him. He was tough. We still train 2 nights a week. Sundays we'd go from the bath to a run through the sandhills or around North Adelaide. We used to swim off the weir in the Torrens in those days when it was not the way it is today. He had us running up Montefiore Hill and things that we never really associated with playing footy. He also brought in a really good level of ethics from the trainers, and we had a good head trainer, we had good trainers, all volunteers, but he had people to show them how to treat injuries, not just the good old rub and the massage, but how to work muscles, how to do whatever. And my fondest moments were lying on the table having a massage. Anyway, he did completely different to Bill Sutherland, and results proved that what he did was correct. Yeah, I mean, none of us played for money. It wasn't an issue. I mean, we didn't even think about it. I think some of the country boys might have got travelling expenses. Alfie Skews was up at Gawler, and Dick Jackson was a fireman up at Port Pirie. There's a few other country boys. I think they may well have got a financial return for travelling expenses. But no, it was, we all played for the club and for the love of the game. And he dismissed the advocate that normally would have represented me. The advocate came to me later and he said, I would have got you off that with a technicality. But Hickenbottom went and said nothing. And as a result, I got pinged eventually, one match, for calling for an incorrect report. The ironic thing was, the day after I got reported, I went into Channel 7, and Doug Thomas, my good old mate Doug, he came and he said, what'd you say? What was the report about? And I said, I got reported for calling him an effing cheat. And he spontaneously said, well, that's not a problem. He said, Jack Broadstock got reported for telling the umpire to stick the whistle up his. And he said, when he got to the tribunal, he said, I didn't say that. I told him to lay the whistle on the grass. And Doug said, when you go to the tribunal, don't say you didn't call him an effing cheat. He'd be better off trucking sheep. Anyway, that was an aside. That was a sort of a happy moment in a very, it was a wrong report. Anyway, as I've already said a couple of times, awards didn't mean much, but it would have been nice to have won.
Yeah, so that report cost him the Magarey medal. He did have a few more things to say that I did edit out of the final version. So that's the collection as it stands now after a couple of years. Good to have a couple of other journos in. So you can get to them through the SANFL site. There's a little tab at the top called History, and then one of the tiles on the screen will take you through to their YouTube channel. So it's an ongoing process. Oh, that's right. I've also been doing this project with the Crows. We were keen to get a handle with our Heritage Committee on people involved in the early days at Footy Park. So we got a pretty good list of characters. There's the late Adrian Sutter. It was a terrific interview. His involvement in the early years of the Crows is a great story. So who's next? We've actually got a Monday morning set aside in March, right? End of March. Our prime target is Sonny Morey, who's all fired up, but he's a busy boy. He's still not sure if he can make that date, but anyway, we're pretty keen to get Sonny. And we've got a list of some other prospects. Mark here has been involved in compiling some biogs, so we rely pretty heavily on Chris and John's knowledge of who's around the place, but we'll have 3 more in the next month or so.